Ladies and gentlemen, a warm online welcome to the Mobility Talks, the web series by the EIT Urban Mobility, where all aspects of urban mobility are considered and discussed in depth. In our previous episode, we explored the city as a public realm, as opposed to the realm of private vehicles, lined up in our streets, bumper to bumper. This time, for our 10th episode, we delve into another transformative force emerging in our cities and challenging the use and ownership of private vehicles: intermodality. Now, when preparing this episode, I had the feeling of opening a Pandora's box. Intermodality is one of those concepts that cannot stand alone, literally. And when you open the drawer of intermodality, you're effectively opening almost every other drawer of urban mobility, to the point that you risk having the whole furniture collapsing over you. But I would say there are three underlying trends that force us to address intermodality, whether we find it challenging or not. First, data-powered digital platforms have taken over many sectors of the economy and will necessarily also enter the urban mobility space. It's just a matter of time. Second, there is a multiplication of short-distance mobility solutions which aim to make hopping on and off a matter of individual freedom of choice. And finally, third, the political trend of making city centres and neighbourhoods car-free or car-unfriendly. And this will tend to limit the role of the private car in the urban mobility mix. In that sense, intermodality is almost inevitable, but the question today is how to move towards seamless integration, how to bring together all mobility solutions under an integrated and interoperable, seamless structure that facilitates movement in our cities. Will it require a technological revolution, or is it rather a behavioral transformation? And who is responsible for making it happen? So I will also be launching a few polls as we go along. And throughout this discussion, I strongly invite you to get involved by using the Slido box to the right of your live streaming window. And that's where you can raise your questions to the speakers. You can also vote for your favorite questions. And please answer the polls. So the one live now is, in one word, can you describe what you see as the biggest barrier for intermodal urban mobility to become a seamless and integrated experience? You can write down your thoughts and we'll be checking in on this as we go along. So, big issues to discuss, but luckily I am joined today by an inspiring lineup of speakers. So let's get started right away with our keynote speaker, Ferdinand Burgersdijk, who is an independent consultant at FRCB and also Maas Councillor for the Benelux. Ferdinand is joining us from Doorn in the Netherlands, and he'll be taking us on an intermodal journey through concepts and practices that will be setting the scene then for our panel debate. So, Ferdinand, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jean-Paul, and thank you everyone for having me. It always takes great organization skills to get these things organized, and you did really well, Jean-Paul. Mostly we say this afterwards, but I think it's due to say so in advance. Also the team with Edwin, Delia, and Irina on the end of the spectrum. Great work, and it's good to be here. So when I was asked to give a follow-up of my keynote or a contribution last time, we had lengthy discussions on where we wanted to go and how to graphically bring this about. So for me, I went back to the question, so what is mobility, right? In order to address intermodality, what is mobility with all these modes, why we call it modal? And for me, mobility is about one question, all right? So we can walk anywhere. It doesn't really go that fast, but we get places. So I think this pretty much shows it all. We have a need for speed, all right? We want to go like warp speed to go any place, anytime, really fast, because we want to be somewhere else in order to see our friends, to work, or things like that. So in order to do that, we want to speed up the process. And speeding up the process has been a lengthy process in itself. So here we started with the postal carriage, all right? So we were bringing packages from one point to the next. And then we thought, hey, maybe we can also include people in the voyage, which was interesting, and you were brought from city to city or place to place, and you visited a lot of new post offices, or usually also where horses could be refreshed and things like that. But the fun thing is, it went really slow, all right, as we know it now. So you could enjoy the scenery, you felt every bump in the road. But then we said, hey, we want a bit more comfort, all right? So we really made sure that our infrastructure was organized in such a way that we could have a fluid trip and go really fast. So hence came the train. And this is a modern one, but it beautifully reflects how much infrastructure is needed in order to get several people from one place to the next. So going into this level of speed, you see that there's always a relationship, and the relationship is centralized around places, right? Gathering places. So if we look at, this is the picture from Utrecht Central train station, just redone, which is beautiful in its sorts, but see how much space it takes up in our cities. So not only the car takes up space, but also other means of transportation. So it's not just about bringing back the car, it's also bringing back all other means of transportation, which we don't need. So why would we have, for instance, buses that don't bring us anywhere anymore and are empty by sorts? So the fun thing is, and this is what we want to talk about, how can we make sure that all these people who want to be in all kinds of different places can find the right assets, the right types of mobility, running from car to bike to e-scooter, train, bus, tram, metro, plane, all right, with all the sorts and types of services that we have out there, like my private car, but I can also share my car with my family. I can bring the kids to sports. I can rent a car when I'm in an airport in a different country, but also I can hop into a taxi, right? So all kinds of services are attached to these types of transport. And this is where it becomes really, really interesting, because then we can oversee how we can migrate the system from this gridlock that we have now into a more fluent one where we can use what we need, because we're over consuming, right? We have built the mobility network of PT in such a fashion that we can move loads of people, but there's only a percentage of about 33 to see how many seats are taken during the day, the occupation rates. So we want to stay out of gridlock. And that means that we have to get some kind of control over the system. And control over the system sounds like really angry, ugly beast, but we can do so in a fashion which is met by our democratic values, right? But we can only do so if we have some kind of information that helps us to oversee it, to help us to make different choices, to give us a feedback, and maybe even a feed forward loop that can help us choose, change, address, and also use the source and types of mobility that serve us best. So I think we shouldn't be looking at the modes separately, because I think that if we're looking at mobility, I saw in starting up this talk with Jean-Paul, I took the liberty of looking at pyramids. I found a picture of two pyramids, and one I put in the Maslow pyramid. And I think most of you know this, starting off with all physiological aspects of our lives, which we need to have covered. Then we want to have a sense of safety. Then another step up is love and belonging. Then we go to esteem. And at the end, we enter into self-actualization, right? We have a similar pyramid next to that, all right? And now I have to move a bit around my screen. So the base of our mobility system now is mass transit, all right? Followed by commercial services like taxis, and now raising fast and new mobility services like car sharing, bike sharing, other types of sharing, right? But still with a commercial end to it. In the end, we also have this thing called private mobility, because that's used by most people, but for some it's not even attainable within cities. So let's make sure that we don't lose it completely. But in the end, next to self-actualization is this peer-to-peer shared mobility. And why is this like the peak of it all? Because it means that we can bring back the most of agility, all right? Because a car and a bike are far more agile than a bus or a train, all right? But if we share them properly, so not only the fact that we can share the asset, but we can also share the ride, then we can make sure that we make the least use of public space and thus take care of our planet best, right? But to understand this all, we need to go back to a basic level of understanding why people travel and the fact that there's constantly a relationship, and I will do this, the relationship, the heart, here it is, between an individual and an asset. All right, and now we look at this, right? This is a cool guy building a huge Lego set, and this is a high level of detail. So within all the different sections of modality, we created standards, right? This is a way of looking at information. So doing so from the PT side, let's say a train or a bus route, it's aligned with stops, but these stops, all right, so line 54 with stops 7 to 10 might get you somewhere in my region, but it will be a whole different process, let's say in England, where Jean-Paul used to live, or maybe in Brussels, where he lives now. So we have to understand that sometimes this level of detail doesn't help us, all right? So we have to go back a step, just a step, all right? It's the same concept, all right? Only we started with this when we were young, in order to understand that if you have things in different sizes and shapes, you can organize them, all right? You can mount them on top of one another. It sticks, all right? This is really cool. So you can build things, right? But now it's very siloed. So we're talking about modes, and we're not trying to talk about modes anymore. We're trying to talk about an ecosystem of mobility. And then we can understand that you can build a train, a bus, or even your private car in that atmosphere, right? It still is the same concept, but it's a bit simpler than we were used to. And even if we're looking at that car, as I just explained, you can use it for ride sharing, you can rent one, you can use it privately. Look at the beautiful Stelvio on the Stelvio. And you can even use it as a taxi, all right? And then we have to see what the overlap is in everything that we do with mobility, all right? We have the individual wants to go from A to B. We've got the asset. And in order to go warp speed, right, in order to engage, you need to be on it, all right? So you need to make sure that you're in the same spot at the same time. Otherwise, you'll miss it. And you'll miss life or your appointment or your date or your next marriage or anything, right? So you have a really big problem. So you have to be exactly at the same spot at the right time. This is how difficult mobility is. But we have got some help there, right? So this is a cute story. When the train started driving in England, they saw that different cities had different time zones, right? They had different use of time. And it was very silly that you left one city at 8:15 and you arrived at the different city at 7:45, right? Whilst being half an hour on a train. So what they actually said was, hey, let's bring in some standardization, which is now called a GMT, and even put forward into ISO, I believe 8603, which we can also translate to digital time called Unix time. And then you have timestamp, which is really, really spectacularly detailed, that you know that you're in the same place, all right, or in the same time zone. And next, we found out this century, just starting the other century, GPS. Wow, this is great. GPS, global positioning systems. All right, so we don't have to worry whether the bus 54 or 45 is driving in Budapest or in London. All right, we can actually point it out. It starts here, it ends there. Really cool. All right. So we're helped. And then we can say, if we've got these, all right, what are the other things that we need in order to build the bridge? All right. We need to have consensus. We have to make sure that we understand one another on both ends, because if you start the build 10 meters out of scope, all right, someone will end up in the water. All right. So in order to build this bridge, we need to make sure that we have some things in common. But when you start building a bridge, I love this picture. I took a long time to find this one. Um, you need to have the scaffolding there, right? So you have consensus, and then you start the build, right? And if you build a bridge, you make sure that the scaffolding's there, all right? And then you start mounting the bricks. And if you're ready, and you have placed the keystone, that's the nice one smack down the middle that keeps it all together, which balances the powers, all right? This is what the keystone does. And it's a beautiful piece of old school masonry. It balances the powers. And this is what we want in intermodality as well. In order to control the system as a whole, we need to balance the powers. And balancing them helps, all right? So we can understand each other, because that's what it's all about. So mobility is ours, right? It's yours, it's mine. So if you don't understand what the F it's about, someone missed out, all right? If I can understand the train table, I'm not going to use the train. If I can understand the ticketing system on a bus, I won't use it, right? And we have to build this trust through integrating slowly but surely these concepts that we can align to. But let's start out with the Duplo set, all right? And build from there. Because it's no use looking at timetables when you're driving your personal car, because it doesn't have any timetables, right? It doesn't, you don't have to look at free floating when you're ordering or when you're trying to hop on a train, because the train doesn't go off track. Simply doesn't, right? So there are restrictions everywhere. But through these restrictions, there's a lovely new concept, and that's called Brainiac. All right. The fun thing is we can muster up everything that we can fathom. All right. So we can think about things and then turn them into reality. So let's turn this into a reality where we can understand one another, where we can communicate over what we're trying to do, and then start to rebuild the whole system. So thank you very much. This was my contribution, and I hope to be addressing your questions.
Thank you very much, Ferdinand. I like the asset and the individual that forms a heart there in the center of the image. Could we maybe show the Slido poll at this stage from the audience? What I see here coming up is very much a transfer design, and I'd like you to just comment on that, because you were talking about the standardization element and what's required to essentially, let's say, connect two blocks together. What does this inspire you in terms of transfer design? Like maybe the way the standard would be expressed in practice, right? So it's not just a question of getting the standard, but it's also how will people live that experience of that standardized interconnection between two blocks?
Cool. I love the way that you frame this, because I was thinking whole different things here when I saw this, Jean-Paul. So thank you for helping me there. So in transferring this, we already have a lot of good things in place, all right? We merely need to get a grip in that sense that we now have organized our information based upon the way that we organize our mobility, all right? I think that the transfer design should be user-centric in any case, all right? Because it's an individual that travels. It's not the bus that travels. I don't care about the bus if no one's on it. So we have to look at what is the centricity of it. Actually, it's the heart of it all, right? This is actually what it is, because if we're talking mobility, we're talking warp speed, and we're talking somewhere on the planet, right? But as long as we don't reach the heart, all right, of it, not the activity, and we can't talk about mobility then, all right? So then it's all useless. So we want to bring things together, and bringing things together, we have to understand that's an individual meeting an asset, right, or meeting a service, or a service is meeting an individual in order to go warp speed together.
And one question just to follow up then from the audience. Do you feel that in this discussion in general in urban mobility, are we too focused on the technical aspects? You mentioned that the most important is the user. Do you think this is not sufficiently addressed in general?
Yeah, so I'm leading the technical standardization and ticketing workshops in the Maas Alliance, which has some reference to this as well. Yeah, we're far too hung up on tech. All right, tech is a means and not an end. And if we're looking at tech, we need to make sure that tech for me is about sharing information. So we have got information networks rolled out, right? We've got data networks called the interwebs or internet. We've got phone networks, all right? We've got global positioning networks. We've got a network of time, right? So we can use these networks in order to bring it together, to bring it home, all right? And now we have to make sure that that we can understand it, because this is where it happens. So if we're talking about something, you need to have a subject. And if you have the subject and you both have the common understanding of what you're talking about, then you can add information to that. And the addition of information could depend on your personal relationship. It could depend on global standards. It could be a very local thing, all right? So we need to understand that in all aspects, we don't have to over-standardize everything, all right, which is sought for and sought after in tech. But we need to understand that we have a relationship. And within that relationship, we need to communicate about things. And because we've got the networks in place, we merely have to organize to have a common understanding on what the subject is. And from there, we can go nuts. It's like putting books in a library, right? So you can go into a library, ask the librarian, hey, where can I find the science section? Where can I find the drama section or the literacy section? And they'll point you in the right direction, right? And this is what we need to understand. We just need to be pointed in the right direction.
Okay, thank you so much, Ferdinand, for helping to point us in the right direction in this debate, in this event. I think that was a very inspirational kickoff to our event. So thanks a lot for having joined us. And
Thank you.
Now I turn to our panel. We'll be together for a little over an hour, possibly, with our panel. So I'm really delighted to introduce Stefan van Dijk, Director of Innovation at the Amsterdam Institute for Advanced Metropolitan Solutions, joining us from Amsterdam. We have Josep Maria Salanova Grau, who is Research Associate, Head of the Data Analysis and Modeling Laboratory at the Hellenic Institute of Transport, joining us from Thessaloniki. We have Tuto Tai, Director for Partnerships, Europe and Events at Mobility Data. She's joining us from Paris. And Oktay Turetken, Associate Professor at the Eindhoven University of Technology, joining us from Eindhoven. So welcome to the four of you. Thank you very much for being with us today. And to kick off this discussion, I asked each panelist to come up with an image that for them represents the key challenge to making intermodal travel seem like a seamless experience. So I'd like to kick off with the first image. And ask who put forward this image with a piece of paper. Please, over to you.
That would be me, Jean-Paul. So, I am essentially from a technical university, so perhaps it would be natural for me to discuss things about technical side of intermodality, but I will not do so. I think that trust is a key concept here. Trust from multiple perspectives, or from the perspective of multiple stakeholders. I think first from the public or among the public and private parties, cities, governmental bodies, mobility service providers or related service providers, traffic authorities, aggregator or platform operators, trust among these, and finally the trust of the traveler to the service that the entire stakeholder offers, through which the customer also co-creates value with all these stakeholders. So I do not dare to say that there is a lack of trust, but I think we do not have the right setting yet to nurture trust among all these parties. So the trust is the key enabler and does not happen naturally all by itself. The question is how to establish trust, or what are the mechanisms at all levels, at technical level, business, and also societal levels, that should be in place to establish trust. I have my own ideas, obviously, for that, like not platforms governed by non-for-profit organizations or entities, public-private partnerships, balance centricity of this platform operators, open data exchange standards, and so on are just key enablers, but we'll perhaps discuss further about all these.
Yeah, absolutely. So you would tend to say that these two pieces of paper are gradually getting together, let's say, but they need a bit of time.
Yeah, it would need some time.
Okay, thank you, Oktay. So then let's move to the second image.
That's me, I think. Yes. So I'm Steven van Dijk, Director of Innovation at the AMS Institute, and I'm of course working on all aspects of intermodality or implementations of mobility as a service in the cities. And what I found fascinating that most of the discussions are being really dominated or focused on, let's say, digital integration and all kinds of new modality or micromobility concepts or shared vehicles, and we get this immense push from the industry with all kinds of new solutions, which is great. But in the end, it all has to be integrated at a different level as well, and that's in public space and that's in the physical environment. And there also we see, let's say, the interesting complexities arise. Well, actually, what in the Slido was in the beginning, how to design these transfer points between modalities. Can we create certain structures and standards also in the public space where you can really make it, let's say, accessible for users, but also that you are able to quickly develop the necessary infrastructure for this, so that the whole promise of intermodality and mobility as a service and the connections between these modalities is not turning into one big nightmare and mess on our streets, which currently has happened a lot in a lot of the cities in Europe and abroad, but it can be done. One of the biggest challenges is how to deal with these enormous fluctuations in the use of all these modalities if you would really have this scale-up system, how to accommodate for this in a public space. I think that's one of the major challenges still to solve.
Okay, so how this all expresses itself in a physical infrastructure as well that is appealing for users and well organized for cities. Thank you, Stefan, for that one. We can then put up the third image, which also displays some scooters.
Yeah, this is mine, and I had a similar idea with the one just presented by Stefan, but I will formulate it in a different way. Digitalization is key. We are pushing for digitalization. So on the left, you can see, for example, a map of any city where you can see all the mobility assets. So it looks like you have a lot of options. But this digital world is representing the physical world that you can see on the right. So it's important to do this in some kind of ordered way. Everything to be to take into account that we are talking about the public space where people will share, they will work, they will be with their family. But I will talk about the last initiative we have seen being highly market oriented. We are seeing different new in mobility modes. We saw the scooters, maybe this is the most disruptive one, populating our cities from one day to another with hundreds, thousands of scooters. This was an initiative driven by the market. It was a company or more than one companies that just put these scooters on the street. And the policy to regulate the use of these scooters came a lot of time after. So it's important that we are willing to give a good user experience, a good travel experience. We are putting a lot of effort on it. So the travel experience will be great. We will have a smartphone. I can unlock any mobility asset in the city. I can use it. I have my credit card there. I will be charged in a mobility as a service scheme. But focusing only on the traveler experience, on the user experience, we will gain demand. We will have people using the services, but we need to take into account the other side, which is the city, which are the externalities created to the other citizens, the other travelers, the other passengers. So we should be careful with putting all this emphasis on the traveler experience, because we can have also undesired effects of less people walking, less people doing active mobility, because I can use an electric bike, an electric scooter, which maybe is not what the city is willing to do. We want people to walk, we want people to cycle, we want people to use active mobility. So it's important not to go only for the traveler experience, to have a business that will generate millions of euros, but to see the real mobility needs of the citizens.
Yeah, so you're really raising the point also of the governance behind who takes responsibility for organizing the whole system, that it's not just user driven in that sense. Thank you, Josep. Which leaves us then with our fourth image, which I would assume is Tuto's.
It is mine indeed, and I must admit, it was inspired a lot by a conversation I had with Ferdinand 2 days ago. So what I heard from my fellow co-panelists is, when you talk about intermodality, when you talk about being either user-centric, city-centric, policymaker-centric, or considering the public space, I hear a lot of different concepts, because we come from a different vision, because we have different questions in mind. The problem is, if you want to interconnect all that, well, today we are left with three different solutions. Either you're a C3PO and you speak all the languages and you're amazing and you're able to live translate between everything. Okay, you don't struggle and you can even help others. Or the second solution, you managed, I don't know which cost, to find a Star Trek universal translator that will help you understand and connect immediately all the IT system, all the tech, all the operation system. Magic. You made intermodality seamless, as much as the engage in Star Trek that Ferdinand was referring to. Or, last option, probably more people like us, you have access to none of these two amazing tools, and then you struggle to make intermodality. And that applies to you if you're a user, because honestly, how many mobility apps can you actually download on your phone? It also applies to policymakers. How many languages do you need to understand? How many new operations you need to put into account when you create a rule? Or what is the cost of your next translator that you're gonna need to purchase? Data providers, operation behind, like mobility operators, mass providers. How many languages? Well, I don't know. We have limited time. We have limited options. And I think we should go back to what Ferdinand has justly pointed. If we want to make intermodality a reality, we need to consider what is important. And maybe the most important is creating a connection.
Okay, so really creating that connection, access to information is also important, and the speed at which one accesses information. Thanks a lot for that, and maybe we can again then bring up the Slido poll to see how that's doing. Transfer design really seems to be the key. Also, there's an element around convenience. Can you maybe then comment on this issue of of the transfer design. Stefan, you already mentioned that in your initial intervention. Do you think that this is really the main barrier that upon which the experience of an intermodal transport system can be really improved?
Well, I think so. If you now look at what's going on in most of the cities in the world, and more closer to home in cities in the Netherlands and in Europe, one of the projects that we're doing at EIT or Mobility is on mobility hubs, and to determine what are, let's say, the best locations to place, also different scales from train stations to neighborhood level, actually the locations where you would offer new shared mobility services or other modalities, and also do it in a way that it's, let's say, more clustered instead of these large free-floating systems, because the free-floating systems occupy the space in let's say, directly following demand and supply. And of course, this is not a problem directly for the user, but sometimes it is, because he cannot find his vehicle or whatever. But it's in public space, and the public space is from everyone, and is owned by the citizens. And what we see, and there is a feedback loop if you look at it from a systems perspective. If you're not solving effective, let's say, transfer design or clustering, or let's say organizing the public space to accommodate for these new modalities, then the resistance from citizens living in a neighborhood, in the street, that have suddenly 20 electric mopeds on their pedestrian sidewalk, they will get so annoyed that they will ask the municipality to stop this new way of this new mobility service. So if you want to innovate in mobility, you have to take into account the public space and the public concerns. And I think this can be done. This is exactly what Ferdinand said. If you're able to work together and also not have this massive push by, let's say, the industry or capital to only focus on very quick scaling up the service, but really take into account these, let's say, public concerns, then in the long term, you will be the one to solve it and also have the access to the city. If you're not solving it, then you're only organizing resistance to a fantastic solution that you might have. I think that's something that is really important in let's say, the transition phase that we are currently in.
Oktay, you were mentioning trust. Do you think this is a key element to help build trust between communities and the service providers?
I think it boils down to the concept what we call balance centricity. That the stakeholders, I mean, there are so many stakeholders that need to come together to make it happen. And certainly they have different expectations and needs from intermodality or from such solutions. And somehow, as my fellow friends and colleagues mentioned, we need to balance these expectations, work together to balance these expectations. So it's not like customer centricity. It's not only mobility service centricity or mobility service provider centricity. It's not only city, but all. We need to come up with something that would lead to compromises at all sides, but also balance the cost and benefits. So you need to work together with the cities, as Stefan mentioned, to prevent such externalities to happen, like that you end up with hundreds of e-scooters in your street somehow. But at the same time, you have to leave the room for mobility service providers to get profit, to still operate in a meaningful way, in a profitable way. So you need to find that balance, and that's a very thin line. But if you can't find that thin line, will not be able to enjoy this, or it will take more time. Then we will have to deal with so many externalities, so many challenges that we are right now dealing with in several cities. So a lot of private companies, mobility service providers, are pushing for extension and booming up the services that they provide, but they're creating, but without any explicit consideration of the policies that come probably that also come a bit later on of the cities, from the city sides. So,
okay,
yeah.
Yeah, because here we're focusing very much on the physical aspects of the infrastructure. I'd like to maybe bring in the user perspective as well that we've spoken about already through Ferdinand, and some of you have referred to that already too. So let's imagine I'm a traveler, right? I live in a city. I want to get to the football stadium. It's 55 minutes away. 3 connections on public transport. It's pretty long. I don't much like it, but it's covered by my annual travel pass, right? And there are other options. I see them as I go by on the tram, you know, loads of different people going around the streets in different manners. But what would be the 3 most fundamental elements that you can think of that would convince me that I need to drop my annual travel pass or drop my car and go for this intermodal transport system? Tuto, maybe first.
Well, first, I think if we really want to consider intermodality, we can't drop the annual pass. We can't completely drop public transit, because from a carbon footprint point of view and an efficiency point of view, it's still one of the fastest way to bring a lot of people on a similar route from A to B. But intermodality comes in play when it's the first mile and the last mile. And to make it easy for someone not to actually need to rely on their own car, we need to make sure that it is discoverable. As a user, I shouldn't be discovering these scooters and e-moped when I see them from the bus window or from the train window. It should be discoverable from the very start of the planning. I should also be aware of how difficult it will be to take them, how much it will cost, and if all in all it replies or it meets my specific needs. And there was a study a couple of years ago, and I found it very interesting, saying that in very dense area, actually, if you include walking, we're actually very good in intermodality, because today, most of the trip planners that people use would tell you that you need to walk X minutes to get from your house to the bus station. And then the next step would be that the same trip planner tell you that you can walk to the e-scooter, and from the e-scooter you take a bus, and from the bus maybe, I don't know, an e-moped to make the last mile, and that would be efficient. And so.
Okay, thank you. So it's really the access to the information from the start, from the planning phase, that
Exactly.
will convince me to maybe find other options on the way.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Josep, what would be your sort of top 3 elements that would convince me?
Yeah, I will, in line with what Tuto just said, I think it's important. Accessibility is key. So intermodality, I agree that the backbone should still be the public transport, the mass transport, because of scale economies, because of environmental aspects. But we should create the right accessibility conditions to this backbone, because this the mass transit will work optimally in high density areas. So it's important to identify where it will work properly and where we should have scooters, bicycles, mopeds to provide accessibility to the backbone. So this is important. Second, you say that you need 3 transfers and 55 minutes, right, to the stadium. I think there are more elements, but you provided 2 of them, because when you have 2 options. When you select what of these 2, you are doing a multi-criteria analysis at that time. So it's not only the travel time, 55 minutes, it's also the transfers, 3 transfers, but we have also reliability, because you know that maybe I will not find a free bicycle because of the game today. So the 55 minutes can become 120. So it's important that the authorities that are providing the framework for people to move, that they should understand what are these weights or these costs. So reliability is very important. As you said, transfers, 55 minutes, no transfers, 55 minutes, 3 transfers is totally different, because in the transfer, you have a stress. Maybe you don't know, you need to buy a second ticket, maybe you will lose the connection. So it's important to take into account not only the travel time, but all what creates what you receive as a cost. Because if not, you will say, okay, I will pick up my car, I will pay 20 euros for the parking, but I will be quiet, I will not be stressed. It's important to understand the travel chain, how I feel accessing to the public transport, getting into the bus. As to say, I want to know that I will find a bicycle. I want to book the bicycle. I don't want to have the stress that I see the bicycle. Can I get it or not? So it's important to be able to book the whole trip chain, to be sure that everything will be in time and in place when you will need it. So again, this accessibility and digital smooth information about everything. And if there is no bicycle, the system will give me an e-scooter, which is 10 meters away of this bicycle. So I will feel that I will make it on time without running, without stressing myself.
Yeah, that's the reliability could convince me. I don't want to spend time on a phone with a machine telling me that I have to press 1, 2, 3, and I end up with someone hanging up on me. So indeed, I think that would be an important one. Stefan, what would be your top 3 elements to convince me then?
Yeah. So a lot of good things are already have been said, but I think reliability is one of the extremely important parts across the whole, let's say, trip and journey. Also, I think, let's say, the beginning, the first modality that you use and the accessibility of that one is, let's say, in the chain is extremely important. And you only, let's say, at least on the personal level, I only get aware of all the different options when my own car broke down and had to be in the garage for a week, and I had to visit a friend of mine. And suddenly I said, okay, wait a minute, I have more than 120 shared vehicles in my neighborhood. I didn't even know that they were that many. I downloaded 5 apps and I picked the easiest one. And the easiest one was where I could register within 1 minute and reserve a shared car. So this ease of use of that, and then it's also really at the digital layer, really extremely important, and that you're, let's say, you're insured, the bill is being paid, etc., etc. Another thing that I now see also, if we look at an example from the Netherlands, we just had the European football matches still going on. The Netherlands are out. We also had a match in Amsterdam, of course, several. But when you book the ticket, you already immediately get an advice from the UEFA and the arena where the football matches are taking place. What would be the best trip that you could take? And they do this because they want to manage the demand, because the area is so crowded and so many modalities are coming together. And I think this kind of way of thinking, also from, let's say, the big event owners, but also from the city, because they are also involved. Everybody's involved, including public transport operators, taxis, parking spaces, garages there around the area. They all manage this trip for you. And that's what I also really found very strong, that only by collaborating between all these parties, they can actually make it work.
Yeah, that's another important one, the connection between intermodal options and actual destinations that become popular for whatever reason. And then finally, Oktay, what would be your top 3 elements to convince me to shift?
Top 3 elements. I'll go with another direction, if you allow me. I'll tell you a story, your story essentially, your experience, travel experience, and then we can see what elements we can identify from there. So, Jean-Paul, like, you have an annual pass, you probably have the application of this public transport operator in your mobile, already there in your mobile smartphone. Good. So you entered your place and then the destination, stadium in this case, And this mobile application connects to a platform in the background that you don't know because you don't need to know. And in this platform, there are several services of different service providers, including the bike sharing, e-bike sharing, whatever sharing, car sharing included, and so on. And what this does is that once it receives this request from you through the public transport operator's application, it generates travel options for you. Obviously only those that, or those that surely include public transportation because you're connected through that application, but complements that with the others. Like leg one would be biking to the station and then go take the train and so on and so forth. And then, you pick one of these options. Then the application gives you a ticket, QR code or whatever. And that ticket activates the trouble, all legs, without any hassle. You traveled, you take the bike, hop to the bus, took the metro, and so on and so forth, using your mobile device and the application. And finally reach to the stadium to watch your favorite Euro 2020 final between England and Italy. Congratulations to them. By the way, so all these transactions, okay, handled magically between all these mobility service providers and other type of providers, financial and ticketing, reservation, and everything. That's the vision, huh? Handled in the background magically without you knowing, because you don't have to know, you don't care. And the costs are deducted automatically from your annual pass. Everybody is happy because you're happy you experience more or less a seamless travel experience, hopefully hassle-free and customized. Public transport operator is happy because you use the services, and so it kept the customer touch point. It kept you. It knows that you used the service. Other service providers are happy because you use them, and because they were able to sell their service to a customer who was reluctant to connect or seam all these pieces and perhaps unaware of the existence of the all other providers altogether. City municipality is happy because you did not contribute unnecessarily to the traffic, because you did not take your card despite the fact that you passed through the city. And by the way, finally, perhaps in this scenario, thanks to the collaboration between cooperation, I should perhaps say, between the service providers and the operator and the public bodies, cities, and the agreements on cities, mobility and environmental policies, the platform, for instance, provided only green options on the legs that cover certain districts of the city, because these districts already suffering from traffic and pollution, for instance. So it did not include any car sharing service inside the city, for instance. That's the scenario.
The scenario that you're describing seems to me to have already brought many players together, at least on the digital side of things, to make things seamless for the user. If that were to happen, probably I would be convinced.
Thank you.
But in terms of this digitalization, there's also a question in the audience, and I think it's an important one. Will all this in the end ease intermodality, or aren't we making intermodality even more complicated because the digital world can bring many more options into play in the physical world? Okay, so maybe also a comment on that from the panel. Tuto, maybe first. Do you see a risk that the more seamless we get in the digital space, the more chaotic possibly the physical space could become?
I think it would be less if we. I really like Oktay's story, and I really wish that it will be yours one day, Jean-Paul, when you go to the stadium, regardless of who wins the soccer match at the end. In the sense that if on a digital level it is seamless, and as Oktay said, there is less congestion in the street, then the public space is safer. The public safe is given back to the people who choose to walk or enjoy coffee on a sunny terrace in the street of Brussels or Amsterdam. So actually, I think that if we want to give back the public space to the people, to the public, then going from A to B should become less of a hurdle. And then here you are. The digital world will actually help you organize better, or actually help you reappropriate the public space.
Do you agree with that, Josep? You were talking about some of the externalities that this could create. Do you think that rather on the contrary, it will be able to solve some of those problems?
Yeah, I think that what we should manage is the information we provide to the users. Because if in the past the problem was a lack of information, today the problem is how to manage the large amount of information. As you said, there may be 100 ways to go from A to B. But the system and the solution suggested by Oktay should learn from you, should understand that you like to cycle, or when it rains, you like to use your car. So it's important because we are managing a lot of information, a lot of alternatives. So we cannot just give you 100 options. You would say, okay, I will take my car. So now we should be wise in the way we present you the alternatives that the system had understood that they may be your preferences. So if I know that you don't like to bicycle, I will not put bicycles on the trip chain. If I know that you are really aware about CO2 footprint, I will not put even a bus. I will be bicycle, walking. So it's important that these systems should be personalized and should learn from your decisions what you want to do. So I think this is the next step. That today that we have a lot of information, how to present it, how to share it. And this applies to traffic management. This applies, I think, to everything in mobility. Because now today we can talk, in the past we were talking to the drivers by traffic lights, led by some BMS panels. Today we can talk to every driver. We can talk to them, you should go right, you should go left. So now we should manage two things, the information and how the user will use information. If we say to the users that this street is congested, in 5 minutes, this information may be not valid because everyone will avoid this street and will be uncongested. So it's not only to manage the information, the flow of information, but we should predict the reaction of people, because if not, our information can be not valid anymore, and the people can tell us, but this street is red. I select the red one, the green one, and it was red. So it's information, flow of information, and reaction, or how people will react to the information.
And you're raising here the issue of the learning of the user experience. If I can briefly go back to Tuto, because there's another element there, which is the greener option. I think it was Stefan maybe mentioned that. How do you see that being integrated into the user then choosing one option over another? Do you see that as a possible thing? Maybe cities might be interested in favoring the greener option, but how would that work in practice?
I think exactly just as Joseph has just said, it is based on data. If we have access to a lot of data sets, a lot of good quality data sets that are open and that can be shared between different operators, different point of view, then you can actually, and I will trust the digital world to come up with the next solution or the next converter, you can actually build an amazing converter of, I don't know, for example, frequency of buses, crossed with the way that they are proposed, crossed with the waiting time of their trajectory, and then you will come with the CO2 emission. I will trust my digital friends to come up with that solution. But as Joseph said, we need the data, and we need the good quality data. We need up-to-date data. So that would be key for me if we want to push forward for a greener option, a greener modality.
Okay, thanks for that. And Stefan, because you were mentioning the links already with the events and certain decisions being made. Do you think digital platforms can help policymakers in maybe approaching some of their public policy challenges? Do you think they consider that as one key area for their development, or do they still see that as a risk factor?
Well, no. At least from the recent work that we've been doing, and specifically in the city of Amsterdam, where we have the experience, is that they actually hold mobility as a service and also an intermodality really offers a lot of, let's say, new options for also the cities and policymakers to, let's say, also influence behavior of the user, the mobility provider, the user itself, in making a good selection what kind of modality he wants to do. And you also, the city could also introduce all kinds of interesting incentives in these systems if they would join forces also with mass providers, and they are doing so. But it's one of the things that Joseph said is very important. So we can nudge people to take different, to make different decisions, or we can give incentives, but actually, this is the first time that we can directly see what the influence of certain incentives are. So for instance, Uber has one of the best insights in elasticity of the prices of their trips. They get real-time feedback on any of the, let's say, changes in price they make and the effect on behavior and on drivers. And this is also something that is super valuable for public transport operators, for cities, not so much to dive into Uber data, but to have a stake in this process themselves. In Amsterdam, we have fragile quay walls and bridges. We have a very old infrastructure in the middle of the city. And if we have too much traffic, it damages. So if we can nudge drivers in their car, this is not about intermodality, but if we can nudge drivers in their car through their TomTom route navigation to say, okay, this is the fastest route, but this route is almost, let's say, 30 seconds slower, but you can save world heritage. Why aren't you not taking that route? So how can we use these kind of, let's say, public incentives that are important for us all as citizens, and also include them in the choices that individual users are making in their mobility? And this is for green transport or other causes that might be important, or air quality. You can also introduce this as one of the incentives to manage peaks in reduced air quality in cities. This is all possible, but these options still are very much being explored. But I think it's a big opportunity.
There may be some confusion between a nudge, which is clearly a marketing nudge, and a nudge that would be more of a sort of a citizen conscious nudge. And maybe that's something that people still fail to fully understand the difference between. And there's one question in the audience related to trust. So maybe that's one for Oktay. The saying that trust can only be built on common values and beliefs. So how do we build this trust, especially when considering on the one side the interests and objectives of digital platforms and operators operating within that area, and then the governance of public space, which are two totally different worlds. They need to connect. How to make that happen for urban mobility? How to build that trust between the two, and do they share the same values, do you think?
Not necessarily, no. They do not share the same values, I think. And that's one of the difficulties that we are facing right now. I think one side of the story is that I mean, a very important enabler of this intermodality are platforms. And who owns the platform is a very, very important consideration, and how it is managed and how the data that we have in this platform is owned or governed and used is a very critical question that we still have to work on. The governance structures is so important. So we've been working on a project right now, and it's such a challenge. It's a platform building, and it's such a challenge to really come up with a structure that is open, that is inclusive, that has that somehow involves different stakeholders in the decision-making process about what happens with the data and who owns the data, and can mobility service provider owns the data, or can we use the data, and so on. So it's a difficult, it's a challenging work. But one thing that we consider very, very important to establish trust is to make this platform as a not-for-profit organization, working only with open data standards, data exchange standards. That we find very, very important to at least set the first stone, or put the first brick on establishing trust. Because you can't be, I mean, as a traveler, if you know that there is a platform and that's a for-profit organization owned by a for-profit organization, we think that it is very difficult to really establish trust between all these stakeholders. It has to be a public-private partnership entity, which is also governed and owned by such an entity. Otherwise, we don't think it would really work, because we might end up with another Google or something similar.
Tuto, a reaction from you.
Yes, I wanted to react to what Oktaya said about trust and sharing. Most stakeholders not sharing the same values. I agree that most of them will not share the value, but I do believe that the foundation of trust should be starting to talk to each other, like we are all doing here in this panel. So I would say that before even trying to build, if it's a for-profit, non-profit, what values do we agree on? Well, we should start about defining a dictionary or pragmatic concept that we all agree on, because the only way we're having this discussion today, all of us, for example, we have decided to use global English. We have also decided to listen to each other with respect and try to understand each other's perspective. That can only be built if we share something before even the value. So I would say that to bounce on the idea of the shared data standards before building yet another shared data standard, open data standard, which I strongly believe in, trust me, we should make sure that, for example, what we call a user, we understand it the same way. A journey is a journey, a trip is a trip. And it is how you build trust for me, making sure we share words.
Yeah, a common dictionary, and I feel that we're getting into something of the mechanics of this platform that somehow brings everything together in an integrated manner. But are we talking about a single platform, or are we talking about many different platforms? And who takes responsibility for putting it together? Stefan, maybe you have a view on that.
Well, of course, I have some ideas, but I don't have a very clear-cut answer, because this is, for me, it feels still that it's really in the middle of discovering what we should do. And I think the former speakers, also panelists, also pointed to this, is that it's not. So it's very easy to, let's say, aggregate everything into several important words and say, okay, we need a platform or whatever. But if you really have to look much closer to actually, okay, what is happening in let's say in the system, or the system of platforms or ecosystem, and which roles are there to play by the different parties. And sometimes, so I think we're now also, if you look at the work in standardization on MAS, we're finally getting there to say, okay, these parts can be, let's say, run and also operated by market parties. This is what actually really should be done by a public organization or non-for-profit organization, because it's really part of a critical infrastructure that is influencing the whole mobility system of a city. This is the classic discussion about what should be private and what should be public. The only thing is, I think what we've seen for the last couple of years is that the the industry, and the commercial partners are much quicker in developing solutions than a public organization can do based on its capacity and capabilities and funds. If there's 4 billion invested in a platform company to scale up as quickly as possible, that you can't work from a public organization to develop something that is competing or could replace or whatever. And I think these worlds are really conflicting sometimes now in the discussion. But it's good, and this is what's going on. And I think it's really carving out the different roles in the ecosystem. And some of it will be public, and we will develop standards to be able to communicate with each other. And some of the services will be private. And I expect that there will be a bigger influence in the platform solutions that we see from a public perspective than we have seen in the last couple of years from the private industry. If I look at least in the European discussions, sovereignty of data and tech is one of the leading principles in all discussions, also towards Amazon and Google and whatever, Microsoft and Apple and all the many other big tech companies. This will really be a major force. I think we will expect in all discussions, also at all European city levels.
That's an important point. It comes back also to some policy decisions, accessibility, inclusion, social justice, which could all be impacted by the way a platform is built and integrated. Josep, maybe also a view from you on this public versus private digital platform, and also, for-profit, non-for-profit, single or multiple.
Yeah, I want to say that independently of the technological part of the platform, we are trying to combine or to put people to collaborate with different backgrounds, not people, companies. The good we are selling here is mobility. At the end of the day, we are selling mobility to people from A to B. But we have different sellers. We see public transport networks, which is a public company, authority behind them, where they can be subsidized. And they're interested in providing the best mobility service. But they're subsidized, so they are sometimes less sensitive to the costs of operating. They will keep empty buses because of the social service of these buses. They will keep running buses for 1 or 2 people because these people should be served. So the goal of these companies is the mobility itself. We have non-subsidized parties, which could be the taxi drivers, which their goal it can be mostly to gain a salary. Taxi drivers every morning, they're going to give mobility to the people, but they expect to get the salary to be able to live and to cover the expenses of having the taxi on the streets. So the goal is totally different to the one of authorities or public transport operators. And then we have the large companies. We have very large companies giving services. Uber was mentioned. We have also the scooters by line. And these companies, sometimes they are doing strategic decisions. They want to take a piece of the market, an important market share, and they don't care if they are losing money. They can subsidize themselves the system, but not for a better mobility, but because in a few months we will have the market share, and then they can change the policy and everything. So independently of if we need one platform for a lot of platforms, I think the important aspect is how all these people can sit on the same table. And how can we, because the platform at the end is technology. I can put them by law, everyone under the platform of the city, and they are forced to be in the platform of the city. But I should manage these expectations of all these people. See if I want them in the platform, in the system.
Okay, different drivers indeed. Okay, thank you, Josep. Actually, as our special guest is still with us, Ferdinand, I think maybe a comment would be quite interesting from you on this question of the platform. Is it the winner takes it all?
Thank you very much, Jean-Paul. I really loved the discussion, by the way. Great contributions from everyone. The platform, wow, it shakes up my senses. I think that all legislation in Europe currently is directed against the platform. So let's see how we can collaborate. And I think that was one of the things just mentioned by Joseph. How can we connect things in such a way that we can create trust without the interdependencies? And I like that very much. So to see all the data end up in one platform frightens me a bit, but I know, because it's been tested and proven, that we can use modern technology in order to make sure that this information is treated in such a fashion transparently that only the relevant stakeholders, as the roles that Stefan mentioned, the relevant stakeholders can access that information without giving away any other information which they would like to hold close to their chest. So the platform, the question, I think collaboration and creating an ecosystem unites by using a similar language and harmonizing processes towards a similar goal, because this is what I'm still missing here. And I think the goal should be set by democratic agents, transport authorities, nations within their own realm, where they can say, hey, we want to focus on decarbonization, we want to focus on efficiency of transportation, things like this. Because if we let common and commercial interests rise above that, we won't end up with a system which is controlled democratically. And this is the platform I fear most.
Okay, the public goal that can be served by commercial operations. Thanks for that, Ferdinand. I'm going to raise a question from the audience, which I think is interesting. Assuming we have merged all mobility services into some sort of a platform, it could be one, it could be several. Let's just assume that we have stepped further into integration. Should the platform operator orchestrate, manage the mobility services and manage their quality, which comes back to the issue of reliability as well that was mentioned before? Do you see a connection and a responsibility then of the platform in terms of guaranteeing the quality of the service? Who would like to respond to that one? Let's say Stefan.
Yeah, it's quite a challenging question, in the sense that we just let's say, I think a bit of the conclusion of the former discussion is that if you would have a platform, it would be some kind of a distributed system where you have access, where a lot of different parties would play a role, and there's a, let's say, shared dictionary and exchange of information to make it work and to connect all the modalities also in the physical domain. But this also will mean that, let's say, the service level and the performance level of the whole trip and the responsibility for this is also being distributed. And this is something that, at least that's what I'm now, let's say, extrapolating from the discussion. This is also still something that is quite a challenge to, I think, achieve, because it will mean that you also have to, what we now also see in the public transport system, there will be contracts between the parties on let's say, performance levels and service levels and reliability. And this will translate even to all the, let's say, the micromobility options that we now see in the streets. It's still, at the moment, you still can have a bit of an, okay, hey, this scooter doesn't work. Okay, I give a call and somebody comes out, and here you have, or no, you get it, then you get a taxi because they send you a taxi, how it works usually now, so that these can go from A to B. But this also has to be connected and translated to the whole trip. I'm not fully aware of whether it has been already solved, also from a legal and financial and service level perspective. But this is, of course, also one of those things that we have to take care of. Otherwise, if the whole trip fails, or somewhere in the chain the trip fails, then usually as a user, you will not use that, let's say, trip planner or access point anymore. At least
Indeed.
That's what I would do.
Indeed. Thanks for trying to address that challenging question. I also have one of my own in terms of scope. What kind of scope does such a platform have? I mean, is it on a city level? Is it on a national level? Is it on a European level? Is it on a global level? What are we actually talking about here? Does it connect cities or does it connect countries? Very quickly, Tuto first.
I think it should connect globally, because hopefully one day we will be back to traveling and crossing borders, but also we have all experience living in a bordering region. When you live in Brussels, for example, or when you live in Belgium, you can be very close to France, and some of the mass transit system is actually connected from one region to the other that happens to be into different countries. So getting a limit to a city or a country is not enough. A region as big as Europe, okay, but what if I want to cross slightly further? I think that should also be possible. And if there is one platform that exists that connects all the multimodality that works so well, when I travel to a foreign country, I would love to be able to use it. So it should definitely connect between countries.
Okay, dream big. Oktay, do you agree in terms of the scope and the scale?
Fully agree. Whether it's a one platform or multiple platforms, they should aim at something global. At the end of the day, we have a traveler, and we don't know where the traveler will end up with. So it might be one day hanging in Paris, or another day in Buenos Aires, and another day in Tokyo. And we should definitely give the chance to this traveler to use the same application with the same language that he or she is used to. So yeah, but this is again not dependent on the number of platforms that are there.
I wonder if this dream is a dream of the users, or is it nevertheless mostly a dream of, commercial operators who want to make this happen? Can I have also a very quick comment on that from the four of you, actually? Very quick. Josep first.
Yeah, indeed, as Oktay said in his travel experience, you don't care what happens in the background of the platform. So indeed, for the user, if this platform can be global, it's better. It's like your mobile phone. When you go abroad, you continue calling. You don't care if you are connected to the antennas of Orange in the Netherlands or in Hotel in Greece. You want the service to be the same as you have, the same, as Oktay said, the same language. So for the user, of course, this is something that they want. I think that it's a different scale, not only geographically, but in time, because we are doing 2 trips per day, 4 trips per day in our city, maybe 2 per week in our region, 1 per month in our country, one per month in Europe. So it's not only the geographical, but the time dimension that is changing. For the operators, of course, because they can attract people from other countries to use their service. So it's a win-win situation for everyone. As long as you can make it work without being noticed by the user, it's a win-win situation.
Okay, Stefan, don't you think it nevertheless requires a serious transformation of the way people go about their daily mobility?
Well, I like the reference also to the telecom industry and making a call. This is just not something that we're used to do in the mobility sector and industry, because it's very regional and local and national organized. We've seen in the mobility developments and tech developments in mobility for centuries that it's very national based or regional based. Even the tracks of the trains are different between Germany and the Netherlands, I think, still. But this is a great example. If you would be able to agree as mobility providers and public transport providers to agree on certain standards, where it doesn't matter that your phone makes a connection to the 4G network in let's say United States or in Europe or in Asia or in Africa, I think then that would be an amazing achievement. I don't think it's easy and will be reached very quickly if I look at just the discussions going on. But still, it's something to work on.
Okay, we have to wrap up. I would like to ask then a final question to you all. I would like you to answer in one sentence and I'm asking also the audience the same question. What in your view would be a successful outcome for a highly integrated and seamless intermodal transport system in the future? Okay, one sentence. Oktay, you go first.
Seamless, customized to the needs of the traveler, and optimized mobility for the traveler.
Okay, thank you very much, Oktay, for having been with us. Tuto, what would be your sentence to conclude?
I would go back to what Ferdinand has said. As a traveler, going from A to B, I would simply need to say engage, and that's it. That's done. I'm traveling.
Okay, get onto the system. Thanks a lot, Tuto, for having been part of this discussion. Stefan.
I think it would be that we have the freedom to go where we want and also have the means to do so. But I think in this time, one of the major drivers is that it should be carbon neutral, because otherwise we won't be traveling a lot in the near future or for next generations.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stefan, for having been part of this debate. And Josep, your future-oriented sentence for a successful outcome of an intermodal transport system.
Putting together all the other sentences is that it should be a system that can satisfy both the individual traveler while being right with society and environment. So everyone should be happy with the solution.
Yeah, to find that balance underneath the bridge that Ferdinand was mentioning. Thank you so much, Josep, and to the four of you really for having been part of this. It was a very dense and rich discussion. I certainly enjoyed it a lot, and I can maybe now show the Slido results that are coming in from the audience. They had a limited number of options. It was essentially, can intermodal transport replace private ownership, or is it more a question of combining public transport into a better mobility system for users in cities? So people are still answering. It's been great. Thanks a lot. And now I hand over to Edwin Heersakers, Director at Innovation Hub West at EIT Urban Mobility, who organized this session, put it all together. So Edwin, what are your sort of conclusions from this discussion?
Yeah, really excited, Jean-Paul, to be here. Actually excited that our colleagues, the team of Innovation Hub West, like Delia, Arena, Marjan, and let's not forget Charlotte here, together with you, Jean-Paul, Judson, and all the speakers today, Ferdinand, Stefan, Josep, Tutotai, and Oktay, and you actually as attendees, participants in the Slido as well, made it actually a very interactive episode of Mobility Talks. You made it all possible, which is really great. So it's good to see and feel the energy actually on this content, on the interaction with the attendees. And the word cloud, the responses, interaction via LinkedIn, just days before actually this session took place. And let's not forget the great visuals from all these panelists, from Ferdinand, Oktay about trust, Stefan about standardization on infrastructure modalities, organized versus not so organized, and we'll come back to that slide right now. Josep about various modalities and the travel experience, the mobility needs for people. Tutotai about speaking all the languages as a kind of solution, connect to all as a second kind of solution, and with all amazing tools as a third kind of solution. Actually, it's about creating the connection as we conclude. So to conclude the whole session here, intermodality is a quite complex and such a strategic topic within EIT Urban Mobility. And so the team here in Innovation Hub West, based in Helmond, we've put a final graphic together showing the intermodality as a balance of efforts. So I'd like to guide you through here. So on the bottom line here on the left, so controlled aesthetics and culture passed on through physical infrastructure, a kind of massive way, versus not so controlled aesthetics and culture on a physical infrastructure on a very light perspective. On the left, a natural ease actually of the use of the infra. So it's kind of free floating versus an unnatural ease of the infrastructure, which is actually fixed. So let's give a couple of examples here, a not so controlled kind of approach here. Bottom right, you see a car charging, an e-car charging with actually an extended power cable. That's a great example of this kind of not so controlled, a very light infrastructure part. Another example is, in this case, and I saw parts of the picture already in Stefan comments, here the bicycle parking in Utrecht, where you could store more than 12,000 bicycles. A very ease of use, very fixed kind of environment, and very efficient managed. So a kind of parallel here, Atlanta airport here, massive infrastructure, very controlled. Now another example actually of a natural ease on a free floating perspective. Two nice exercises, one coming from EMS Institute, the autonomous boat in the canals of the city of Amsterdam. Another one is actually the autonomous bus in the city of Helmond right now at the automotive campus. And we all could conclude the final example here, top right. So not so controlled, and a free floating kind of bike sharing system somewhere on the world. I think this is definitely not what we're looking for. So I trust this actually will give you further guidance and balance of the efforts and use of various modality aspects and modes that need to be taken actually into account. So yeah, I would like to go through some statistics as well about the event of today. So we have just under 200 registrations, which is quite high, from 35 different countries, actually being 18 from EU, 17 from non-EU, so very balanced from that perspective. So I would like to highlight here a lot of people coming from Spain, Germany, Belgium, Italy, Portugal, Netherlands, UK, France, really great. And I would like to highlight people calling in, dialing in from Canada, from the United States, from Australia even, Ecuador, Indonesia. What about Brazil, Pakistan, Egypt, Lebanon? So really great to have you all here, and hopefully we'll set a trend for next mobility talks number 11, which I soon will show. Something about the good coverage actually from other types of organizations, being industry versus consultancy companies, national authorities, small medium companies as well. So it's really great to have you all here, and it's great to see the good mix. So final word about this. I would like to invite you and get ready for the 11th episode of Mobility Talks on active mobility. Again, initiated and organized by Innovation Hub West team together with Innovation Hub North as well. So it will be beginning of October. So final word, keep connecting, keep networking, keep thinking about your own mobility behavior, nudge each other. And so together we build trust, drive the change, and making our public spaces and cities livable again. So hope seeing soon at our next interaction of Mobility Talks, beginning of October. Thanks and have a great day.